The recent news about the decriminalisation of late DIY abortion done by the mothers themselves privately, even around birth, has sent shivers down my spine, evoked a very disturbing personal story, and prompted me into voicing my own take on the issue. I am Orthodox Christian, within the constraints of my communist upbringing, where theology was not taught at school, and my parents, who were teachers, were prohibited from attending church or openly displaying any Christian symbols. Although all Christian families in the former Yugoslavia privately openly celebrated religious festivities based on biblical events, and quite profusely so, the lack of formative religious education has left huge gaps in my grasp of the religion, but I am doing my best to catch up. Despite believing in the sanctity of life, I am not for a blanket ban of all abortion, and believe that if done early on in pregnancy due to genuinely failed contraception, rape or similar, much as it is still an interference with God's plan, that God will forgive you. I'd not do it. Personally, I am for abortion up to 12 weeks maximum, and later up to 24 or so weeks in cases where the mother's life is endangered or severe disabilities impact the baby, significantly curtailing their life. And depending on personal circumstances and past cumulative traumas that leave some parents unable to cope with such a blessed, special, yet very hard path in life in every way. My mother, a teacher, did not have a motherly bone in her body and did not even try to build one. She got married at 21 while still studying, got pregnant, and deeply regretted it mid-pregnancy. So much so that she, according to some of our relatives, often angrily voiced her displeasure at the biggest mistake of my life. Once I was born, and she also did not have almost any milk to breastfeed me, so I cried with hunger a lot too. She then refused to feed me at night, and my father, a teacher, had to both work and give me night feeds, which prompted his mother to intervene, have a word with my maternal grandparents, who then asked my parents to move in with them and looked after me while my mother also studied for her final teaching exams. I was barely a couple of months old when my mother got pregnant again, but thinking it was impossible to get pregnant so soon after giving birth, did not realize that until a few months later, when she freaked out and immediately wanted to book an abortion, just for her gynecologist who did abortions and who was a close friend of my aunt's, trying to reason with her not to do it, as she'd herself regretted leaving her only child as an only child, and also thought that the pregnancy was far too gone for her to take part in the killing of that baby. Apparently, a prolonged, fierce argument between my mother and the doctor followed, with many of our relatives pleading with my mother to give me a sibling, to which she threatened with killing herself, as she'd be happiest with no children at all, but would put up with one for her old age to care for her. As for my need for a sibling, she'd openly reiterate that I so do not care. Eventually, with her aggressive screaming at anyone who suggested that she keep the baby, my mother had an abortion at almost 5 months pregnant, leaving the doctor and all our relatives, including my stunned father, in tears. According to her aunt, my great-aunt, she talked about killing it, as if she had got rid of a pesky fly, openly rejoicing how she was the happiest person alive despite the physical hardship of such a procedure, how huge weight had lifted off her shoulders, making her ecstatic and similar. Years ago, her aunt told me how my paternal grandmother and her got so distressed by my mother's celebration that they struggled to sleep, got together and cried, wondering how a woman could do that to her own innocent children, both my sibling and me. My great-aunt told me a few years ago she was so happy that we thought that she'd invite us round to lunch to celebrate her having her child killed. It was so disturbing to witness that many of us, both men and women in the family, were affected by it and still cringe when we remember. My maternal grandmother would excuse what had just happened with, She never cooed over a baby as a girl, never showed any maternal instinct, and now feels stuck. My so-called mother, I felt, hated my presence most of the time. She was extremely violent to me and would conjure up any excuse to take a stick and beat me until my skin all over my body ruptured and I shrilled in pain. She was so violent and proud of it that when we visited relatives, she'd get livid if I did not hear her calling me to come back in from playing in the street, pick up a stick, and beat me so much in front of whoever was visiting the relative, sometimes 5 to 10 people even. Then they often all jump in to protect me, and she'd lash out at them with a stick too. They would have bruises. Some would say, what does this crazy woman do to this child behind closed doors if she does this for no particular reason in front of so many of us? It was not even disciplining, like a small strike or two when I was naughty, and I could be very naughty, I admit. But more often than not, it was pure sadism. I often needed painkillers with all the headache from her hair pulling, kicking me, and breaking several sticks off my young skin, leaving me in burning, excruciating pain. I was too scared to be at home alone with her, and while playing outside was salvation for me, I loved it. I was and still am very sociable. When my friends would go home and my father was still at school, I would sit on the riverbanks by our house, all alone, waiting for him to appear with my heart pounding with fear that my mother would call me to go in and scrape any excuse to beat me into a pulp. She'd often shout my name as I was playing, and I'd frantically run home. She'd then order me to go to the shop to buy something for her, take a long stick and say, I count to 10. If you're not back by 10, I will beat you into a pulp. And she'd whip the concrete banister with a stick, counting loudly, 1, 2, 3, and I'd cry and run and run and run for my life. And once a car almost hit me. The driver broke rapidly with his tires screeching and stopped right by me, showering me with all the expletives under the sun. But I had to continue, despite being shaken up, buy what I needed to buy and run back home. Once I arrived, breathless and shaking with fear, I told my mother that a car had almost run me over, to which she said, Don't worry, I'm not that lucky. While my father would take me into town to buy street popcorn, pumpkin seeds and roasted chestnuts, or to one of our traditional sweets shops, my mother never, not even once, came with us. I begged her to, plead, always in vain, which felt like being whipped by her. Years of serious physical and emotional abuse in many incidents, and many neighbors, relatives, even teachers trying to protect me followed, which seemed to give my mother a kick, as she felt proud of herself for abusing me, given that I had destroyed her life until I was 16 or 17, when I finally told my social worker cousin that if she did nothing to protect me, I was going to her work the next day to tell them about it. I'm in my mid-50s now, and still, for 50 years, I have pulled my eyebrows as a result of the terror I felt in my mother's and then father's, as he joined her in the beatings when I was 10, presence. But the emotional rejection felt far worse than the physical beatings. As I grew older and won dozens of rhyming poetry or drawing competitions, nobody ever came to see me get an award. I was always on my own, and if literary festivals where I was supposed to pick up an award were out of town, I never went, as nobody wanted to take me. Being a super successful teenage poet, with my poetry being read out on the radio, published in various magazines all the time, and the awards from all over former Yugoslavia piling up, helped me find an outlet for so many anomalies around me. But my parents never seemed to be proud, but derisory towards poetry as a genre in general. Okay, we are all different, I accept that and appreciate that. But they could have swallowed their pride at least a couple of times. My entire childhood, I repeatedly listened to my mother, who was always the leader, always the center of attention in any group of people, triumphantly holding a speech and boasting about having an abortion at almost 5 months pregnancy. And then again, despite me crying my eyes out all the time for a sibling, when I was 11, having another abortion again, I think at about 12 weeks. Many relatives remember that too. My sobbing in front of them about needing a sibling, and my mother laughing and boasting how she had an abortion booked at that very moment, leaving those around her speechless. I will never forget the frozen faces of men and women listening to her macabre speech, and then looking at each other as if to exchange their horror before them. As for anyone asking her if she thought about the consequences for me, she'd always laugh it off with, "I do not care, never have and never will. It is her problem. I do what suits me." She'd also almost attack any woman who found out she was pregnant as an accident while having older children, aged 5 onwards, incessantly telling them that, "What do you need that for? Are you crazy? Get rid of it!" And I know several women who aborted their babies after her aggressive cannonade, though I don't know how much she really influenced them. As I grew into a young woman and people started paying me compliments, my mother showed signs of serious jealousy that she often had towards other women for whatever they had that she did not, despite being pretty, bright, and very capable in so many ways herself. Most of the time she refused to go anywhere with me and would often hit me or threaten me with beating me up. Although after the age of 16 or so she didn't beat me up. She was pathologically competitive with other women, even those she was seemingly close to. In my loneliness and being super extroverted and loving crowds, the polar opposite of my father who ran away from people, I always dreamt of having a large family, and if I'd mentioned that to my mother, she'd look as if she was being electrocuted and say, "Have more than 2 children and I will renounce you. Mark my words. I do not ever want to be part of something like that." When I was at university studying English or trying to amid the dearth of normally imported books in English due to the UN sanctions and constant military drills, penury and depression around us. During the war in the region, my mother refused point blank to visit me on the weeks off lectures, stuck in a tiny flat on my own, and I'd spend many days sobbing over the phone to melt her heart, in vain. It was so unbearable that sometimes I felt like jumping from my 7th-floor balcony. Despite severe scars, I loved my mother most of the time and forced myself to concentrate on her amazing cooking while working full-time, her often difficult life with my pretty controlling misanthrope father, being constantly on the go while not driving but walking everywhere despite a serious inflammatory leg illness, her once difficult childhood with an alcoholic father, and ability to differentiate between his illness of alcoholism and being a great dad when sober, the way her mother, my grandmother, had taught her children to differentiate, and all the few good things about her. And I forgave and forgave and forgave, as I only had one mother, and God wants us to cherish our parents as a tie to Him. When I came to the UK, despite the hardship in the country, my parents never asked me for anything, I have to admit. I worked any jobs I could find, even for £1 per hour, and sent huge parcels with necessities back home, as well as cash, as the shops there were empty. My hands would literally bleed while I carried those heavy parcels across London to a man who drove parcels to my country. All day, sometimes I would spend carrying the parcels. I virtually deprived myself of a youth for others. When my lifelong dream of becoming a mother materialized, my mother did not seem to be very happy. She loved my children from afar, called us daily, did a few things here and there with them briefly, but wanted minimal mutual visits And as time passed, my father, who demanded his wife dote on him only, and her, banned us from visiting them until my father died, which could have been years. It was the rejection that broke my heart. Watching most foreign people I knew visit their countries or their mothers stay with them for months at a time in the UK. My mother would visit us once a year for 2 weeks and mainly did crossword puzzles. And she ignored her grandchildren while refusing to have a routine hip operation for 8 years, and in the end got disabled as a result, and didn't have a scintilla of guilt or mercy towards me about her choice. I still showered them with presents and homemade cards, depriving myself of the basics, praying my largesse would melt their icy hearts and they would change. When I had my third child on my own, my mother got very, very depressed. She was tearful and downcast when she found out about my pregnancy, about 6 months into the pregnancy, as I had been scared to tell her for 6 months and had to bottle it up, which was so painful. She refused to tell anyone what was wrong, as she knew people, especially her cousin with 4 children, would tell her off. She did not want to have 3 grandchildren, and while she attended the birth, she then often cried with fury at my place, saying how I should be punished for my selfish decision towards her. She refused to come and pick us up from the hospital in a taxi, refused to cook, saying, "I do not mind sandwiches," and hardly cracked a smile, although she was finally having her operation on her return home. A couple of days after my newborn came back home, and with me having had a C-section and feeding the baby all night, my mother had an almighty outburst. She, aged 59, screamed through tears with all my children, including my newborn, next to her.
"You knew I didn't want so many children around me on my visits here. You knew I loved my grandchildren from afar, but I didn't want to be surrounded by so many of them. For so long, for 2 weeks. You knew how much I despise people having such a huge number of children, 3 children like animals, and how much that would affect me, as I can swallow having 2 grandchildren if I have no choice. But 3, no! You still did it! Selfish! I had you to look after me when in need, and you care only about yourself. Instead of looking after me now, you are doing this to me."
Then I burst into tears and sobbed while she rubbed salts into my wounds.
"Who cares that your daughter needed a sibling and was lonely? I never gave a damn about your need for a sibling, but did what was easier for me. I do not care that you have no siblings, nephews, nieces, or any family apart from your children.
And if I could still turn back time, I would still kill that baby at 5 months pregnancy.
I've never regretted the decision, and I have always felt very happy about it. I'm still very happy about it. When it was killed, I was jubilant, and still am. What is the purpose of having children? I don't understand.
I never felt any love towards you when you were born, and those stupid grannies were telling me, "Oh, you will love that child. It's the biggest love on earth."
And I was thinking when you were born, where is it? I don't feel that. All I feel is anger.
Just anger at my destroyed life, and anger at those stupid moronic sheep women who think that having children is the main purpose in life. Such bulldogs led me astray, and I stupidly copied them. I've also never found myself in grandmotherhood either, and both your dad and I can easily never see you again in our lives, as long as we know you are fine over the phone. At my school, there are colleagues desperate for grandchildren and envy me, and I'm thinking, it's a shame that God grants the opposite to your wishes. I'd really be happy without any grandchildren. I screamed back at her, saying that I'd always felt like a plant with no roots, to which she screamed back,
Concentrate on your children and leave me alone. I have no wish to see any of you for more than 2 weeks a year, and we are happier on our own and without your visits.
I want a kind of a relationship of
do not bother me, and I will not bother you.
When sobbing, I reminded her of my sacrifices in my very early 20s,
when I saved every penny to buy them the things they needed and carried 4 or 5 huge parcels for many hours across London to send them, making my hands bleed. She waved her hand, scornfully grimacing, and said, "Oh, do not overestimate yourself. We would have survived without you two."
I was so distressed, shaking and crying, that I got severe heart palpitations and almost called an ambulance. Then I screamed at her to get another plane ticket and go back home straight away. But the ticket was too expensive. We couldn't afford it. Her abuse of me that day still often reverberates in my head 16 years on. We parted very badly. A month later, my mother had the routine hip operation and, at the advice of my father, refused to take anticoagulation drugs, and she had a stroke. Stupidly, with 3 very young children, including the newborn, I still went to visit them and look after my mother on my own. My parents looked very happy the first 2 days, then treated me like dirt, telling me we should not have come. They found us annoying. My mother, still 59, still refused to take her medication, with them both calling me an idiot about my pleadings for her to take the medication, and despite my aunt being her hospital consultant and calling her and ordering her to take the bloody anticoagulation drugs, she secretly refused. She had another massive stroke and hardly survived, and I had to look after her, change her nappies, be called names by my father all day, and look after my young children, including a newborn, who were sleeping on hospital benches on the lap of a relative in 40 degrees, while all the children in our neighborhood went to a huge aqua park close to our house, many with their loving grandparents. My parents totally destroyed the birth of my child. I was so depressed for a couple of years that I sought medical help, struggled to sleep, and felt so vulnerable and violated, so lonely, yet had 3 children to look after on my own without any help in any way. At times, it was so hard that I wanted not to wake up at all. But my children kept me alive. Deeply traumatized after 4 years of forcing myself to call them and their carers out of duty but not love, and crying for 2-3 days before each call as I didn't want to hear their voices. To survive, I had to finally sever all contact and try to heal enough to be a mother. 5 years after my otherwise pretty healthy mother lost her movement and voice, they both died, and I did not go to either of their funerals. And about 12 years later, I still don't know where they are buried. Many people, neighbors, relatives, my parents' pupils' parents, their colleagues, etc., have told me that my parents' cruelty towards me and running away from my children left them sickened, and that they often struggled to believe what was going on, as we didn't even know this existed. Some would say her hatred towards children in general is palpable and hair-raising, and how her aggressive defense of hardly having any part in her grandchildren's lives disturbed them so much that they feel ill and struggle to sleep, as they would imagine their own children were me and my children their grandchildren. Some would even tell me that through tears. Most would tell me that my mother was so aggressive in arguing with them about it all that they felt scared of her. Most did not go to their funerals as a result either, as they found their conduct disturbing and inexcusable. Even my mother's aunt did not attend her funeral. She told me they should never have had any children, as they've destroyed both your life and their own, and only sinned before God nothing else, which is the best description of my parents' apex era. On the other hand, many, many more sadists abused me. I know that now, in soul, my parents regret it all and wish they could turn back time and reciprocate the love and forgiveness I selflessly showered them with for decades until I could not do it anymore and stay alive. The post-traumatic stress disorder induced by them alone, among so many other forms of abuse by dozens of others, is enormous, almost unsurvivable. The effect my very selfish, appalling parents had on my children, their rejection and selfishness towards them, is far worse than the beatings they unleashed upon me for the first 17 or so years of my life. My point is, having listened to my mother's gloating about her killing her baby at 5 months gestation for 36 years, I fear that women like my mother, profoundly non-maternal, yet innately very aggressive and scary for many, may have gotten hold of the loudest feminist groups and perched themselves at the helm on them, like it often happens in campaigning. Women who may perceive children to be pesky, anchoring non-entities whose rights should be minimized, and those of the women akin to themselves maximized for their own selfish motives and reckless lifestyles. Someone who is as unemotional as those who demand that killing a baby just before birth be normalized normally are very reckless too. I can easily see my own mother spearheading the campaign for late abortions, manipulatively making up excuse for it, and intimidating anyone of influence behind the scenes to get her way. With her, it would be more about her hatred towards children as life destroyers than genuine care for fellow women. Women she was also often intractably and very aggressively jealous of. While I do not know how some women have been prosecuted for having a late miscarriage, which is shocking if true, I also know that in many cases it is the neoliberal promiscuity among women today that, in my opinion, causes reckless behavior and consequently abortions. And then a small number of rapes in abortions is manipulatively used as a cover-up. My own mother was fiercely against promiscuity, and I am very grateful for that. I have been on various sites for single mothers and was truly dumbfounded about the number of mothers having drunken weekend nights out and getting pregnant with unwanted children in one-night stands, not having a clue who the man was, not even his name, and then having abortions. In some cases, they managed to track them down and found out that most of the men were married, which is abuse of their wives by both of them too. Reckless sociopaths. And in other cases, they had the babies, then sent the bill to the married couple, sometimes causing a divorce. Some did not even know whose baby it was, as they had had a few one-off sexual encounters and had to do a DNA test once the babies were born. All in all, there were dozens of mothers posting on their stories of drunken pregnancies, abortions, or births of initially unwanted children, with long lineups of laughing emojis and comments on how normal and empowering all that was today. Out of a few thousands of moms, 3 of us asked if anyone would ever actually talk about the children and their education, food, exchange recipes or similar, instead of about the penis sizes of their lovers, post-outing, vomiting, dating apps, and all of us got blocked. One of the angry mothers then messaged me privately with, "For such a lifestyle, go to Mumsnet." Another one messaged me with, "Go back to the kitchen." Unfortunately, this is the one large side of the reality coin. The loudest and most aggressive feminists who are fine with seeing a baby being destroyed just before birth do not allow anyone to utter. But I will. Interestingly, all the vociferous women ostensibly caring for other women who have brought about this dark change into being have never as aggressively demanded the protection of abused, many battered mothers in family courts, who in huge numbers have lost child custody to abusers, and many have even had their due divorce settlements stolen by corrupt court staff, pushing seemingly thousands of women into suicide. Their grieving families are gagged. It is the very subject I have been campaigning about for 22 years, the protection of genuinely abused mothers. I will never forget when all those years ago, though it feels like yesterday, the torture of my toddler and me by the male and female legal likes of the loudest and most selfish of women demanding that practically women never come of age, and that their every reckless and ultra-temporal conduct at the expense of their dignity always be ascribed to men, happened. Distraught and on the brink of life, I came across a group of around 3,500 strident feminists demanding men be kept under their feet, with hundreds of them joining in every single debate. It's not a debate, actually. They all agreed or they were blocked. Certain that I would enlighten them on the secret world of legally abused and dehumanized, tortured, bereft, robbed mothers and children by the sickest of judges and other court staff, and that they all would congregate into a force to be reckoned with, a force that would march down the streets outside Parliament and demand accountability and immediate change. Not a single feminist commented on my post. I remember going back to it every 5 minutes and always finding the same zero interest. The strongest permeating sentiment that I got was that of hatred towards family life, fidelity and motherhood, far stronger than any bona fide need for women's rights. The ulterior motive that I fear may be the driving force behind the latest conquest over the lives of innocent, just about to be born children, and the basic need for the usage of head and conscience alongside genitals too.